Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be talking about anime episodes 150 to 152, which will be covering manga chapters 231 through 236. But yeah, you guys ready for some of the most satisfying punches you'll ever see in One Piece, or any piece of fiction that for that matter? And also, you ready for some earth-shattering new revelations? Well, I've got the episodes for you here. So yeah, this is going to be kind of a longer episode because there is a lot to talk about. But yeah, let's get started. So the synopsis: after Bellamy beats up and steals Cricket's gold while the Straw Hats are out in the forest capturing the South Bird to direct them to the knock-up stream, Luffy and the crew come back to find everything a mess with everyone wounded and downed. He decides it's time to do something about Bellamy and goes back into Mock Town to retrieve the gold, as well as to punish Bellamy for mocking Cricket's dream. Once Luffy returns, it's time to make their way to the knock-up stream and to Skypiea. But during all of this, we also get a glimpse into the world government as they deal with the fallout from the loss of Crocodile. So differences. So there are a couple differences in these few episodes. So during the Luffy versus Bellamy fight, they added a few extra scenes that and sort of a few extra hits to extend the fight. But I don't really like it, and I'll go into why I have a problem with these extra added scenes later on in my thoughts section. There's also a moment where Nami asks Zoro why he didn't go with Luffy to get back at Bellamy, and Zoro gives his reason, and Nami responds to him like, "What is that? Are you an idiot?" And Zoro just tells Nami to shut up and go away and that she's in the way. But in the manga, you hear Sanji sticking up for Nami and yell at Zoro saying, "Hey, Marimo man, what did you just say to Nami-san?" And that isn't in the anime. I mean, that's not really a big deal, but it's interesting that they took out that because they're all, Sanji sticking up for Nami is always kind of a big thing, or it's defining character trait. So yeah, it's interesting that they took that out because it's just a line of dialogue really in the background. And then of course, like I mentioned a few episodes back, this is where you would see the Buggy and Ace scenes. So right after Luffy gets the gold back and he points to the sky, that's when it jumps into Buggy and Ace running into each other, and then that's slotted in between that moment as well as all the scenes in Marijoa where with the Gorosei and the world government and the Marines. And so yeah, like I mentioned in the episode where the Buggy scene took place, I think 2 podcast episodes ago, is I think they wanted to fit in all of the Marijoa stuff in one half of an episode, and if they added and kept the Buggy and Ace stuff, there was not enough material for the Buggy and Ace stuff to fill an entire half episode, but there wasn't enough that they could just like squeeze it in there. So I think that's why they moved it up so that this entire back half of the episode can be just solely for the Marijoa stuff. But yeah, so those are all the differences that I could really find. Let's jump into the thoughts. So the Straw Hats continue to try and capture the South Bird, but it keeps messing with them along with the other bugs in the forest. And I just love the grinning of the South Bird as it continues to mess with all of them. In fact, this whole sequence is pretty damn hilarious. As them all fending off these oversized bugs. And some of my favorite ones are Zoro using the dull side of his sword to continually beat up these cockroach-looking bugs one by one, even though they have no chance against him, with Robin just kind of off to the side looking on. And it's also a nice added touch that Zoro did respect Robin's wishes in the last episode to not kill innocent living things meaninglessly, resulting him in flipping his sword around and only knocking them out, despite the fact that it's probably more work for Zoro and it's kind of annoying to him. But he respects his crew members, and so he goes along and follows, what Robin had asked him to do. And I like that sort of nice character development. Then in an even funnier scene, we get Usopp, Nami, and Sanji coming across a massive slug. We see them frantically throwing salt. Like, first off, why do they even have these huge bags of salt to throw on the slug? And then just randomly, there are these pigs running around, just thrown in there for just comedy's sake, I feel like. And then just the absurdity and randomness of this entire scene is just peak One Piece comedy. It's just so funny to see all these random things happening. However, kind of switching tracks, getting back to where the cliffhanger of the last episode came, we get to see the juxtaposition of Bellamy's gang attacking Cricket and Mashira and Shoujo. And we see Cricket is not necessarily a pushover, as he easily takes out Circus. Although, I kind of get the sense that Circus isn't all really that strong. So it's maybe more of a comment on Circus than it is on Cricket. But then again, Cricket did kind of hold his own against Sanji for a little bit. But then we see Bellamy join the fight with his devil fruit power, the Banabana no Mi, or the Spring fruit, and easily overwhelms the three of them by bouncing around like crazy with some insane force behind his punches, kind of similar to Luffy actually. I think the most irritating part about this entire thing is just the arrogance on display by Circus after he just got his ass handed to him by Cricket, only after he gets saved by his captain Bellamy that he talks a big game and even starts attacking a weakened and incapacitated, Mashira and Cricket, and Mashira taking the brunt of an attack while Shoujo does everything he can with his sonic voice, but he's still no match for Bellamy. And by this point, I don't know about you, but I absolutely hate all these shitheads. Like, you just hate these guys with like this red hot rage. Like, they are so annoying. And you just want to see them beat down so bad at this point after all the crap that they've done so far. And it's also here you get to see a really emotional moment. And that while, Cricket's mission started off as sort of a bitter motivation to prove his ancestor right and to restore his name's honor, because of Mashira and Shoujo's compassion and companionship, it's really become more about a warm friendship and a sense of shared dreams and adventuring. And seeing the fond memories that Cricket's had of their time, having fun searching for the treasure and how much they really do mean to him, really shows you that deep down under that sort of grumpy and tough facade he puts on, he truly is a warm and caring man. And some punks just harmed his family. It really hurts, and it's so annoying and infuriating, which is just another thing to add to the list of just how much you hate Bellamy and his crew. But if that wasn't enough, Bellamy commits the biggest sin of all in One Piece, making fun of a person's dream. And Cricket, being a man who has honor and pride in his goals, stands back up to Bellamy before he leaves. I mean, thus far, Bellamy is easily the most hated character in One Piece at least at that point in the story. And I still remember how much I hated this guy. And I wanted nothing more than to see his ass handed to him. But sadly, Cricket is no match for Bellamy. Back in the forest, the Straw Hats all regroup after struggling on their own to catch the Southbird. One just lands above them to mock them. And as Chopper translates for them, he's just completely talking trash. But Robin, as awesome as she is, uses her powers to catch it really quickly. As long as she could see it, she can grab it. And again, we get a quick showcase of just how Robin fits in nicely with the crew and how useful her abilities are. After catching the Southbird, they all come back to find the aftermath of Bellamy's attack. And after learning that it was Bellamy and that he stole all the gold that the monkeys and Cricket worked so hard was stolen, essentially stealing their dreams, Luffy is finally pissed at Bellamy and epically decides to go back into town and take care of things. And I love that Zoro offers to come, but Luffy just says he'll be fine alone. And when Cricket tries to stop Luffy, Zoro offers him his Wado Ichimonji sword. And that sword of all he's willing to just give away and lend it to Cricket really says something that if you wanted to stop him, here it is. Like, you got it. This is how serious his captain is about avenging their dreams. And yeah, oh my god, it's finally going to happen. Like, it's finally going to happen. Luffy is finally going to beat the crap out of Bellamy. And something we've all been wanting so badly, especially after what he just did to the Saruyama Alliance. Then, in a brilliant hype-up scene, we see one of Bellamy's underlings come across the updated wanted posters and sees the real bounties of Zoro and Luffy and freaks out that Luffy is actually worth 100 million, and we're reminded that Bellamy is only worth 55 million, not even matching Zoro's 60 million. Of course, we all know that Bellamy couldn't probably even take on Sanji or even Robin at this point, let alone Luffy and Zoro. And this scene is genius, as it reminds us just how freaking stronger Luffy is than any of them, and you just can't wait to see this one-sided beating. I mean, to give even more excitement to this scene, there's sort of a ticking clock where Luffy has to make it back in time for them to get out to the knock-up stream. And I just love hearing everyone in Bellamy's crew freak out upon hearing Luffy's real bounty. However, being the arrogant idiot he is, Bellamy thinks that it's a fake and that he's just trying to promote his bounty so that people will see it and get intimidated and just quit right away. Basically Usopp's strategy. And it's at this point you can't wait to see him find out in a really painful way how royally he messed up and messed with the wrong person in the wrong way. Like we've seen with Shanks and with Luffy earlier on, he'll just walk it off if you disrespect him. But when you start messing with innocent people and their dreams, then it's over for you. Like Luffy will fight tooth and nail for those he respects and cares about. I mean, at the time, I honestly can't tell you how excited I was to read chapter 232 and to see episode 151, because I think collectively we all wanted so badly to see Bellamy put in his place by Luffy, because he is such a sadistic and arrogant prick, and he is just so bad. And I love even at the start of the confrontation, he's still underestimating and is still talking crap to Luffy, asking him if he can even throw a punch, thinking he's weak because he didn't fight back earlier at the bar. But in reality, Luffy's probably even stronger because he was able to choose not to fight back in a situation where it was unnecessary. And that's something I actually failed to discuss in the last episode, or the last podcast. How I really like how Luffy is one of the few shonen battle genre heroes that's capable of solving conflict without his fist. You know, I know Naruto is famous for his talk no jutsu, but it often comes at the end of after beating the crap out of the enemy. But Luffy has often been able to just turn a would-be enemy into an ally even without laying a finger on them, or have the restraint to not immediately charge in fists ablazing, despite his default solution being just that, which is interesting. And yeah, I really, it's really interesting to see Luffy showing restraint when it's actually less, necessary. And I like that he's kind of learned this from Vivi, and so he's kind of like taken that to heart, as well as Shanks. Now, before we get into the actual fight, I just wanted to mention that Toei actually does something cool again with the art direction, and they do something really unique and cool during this scene in how they animate the shadows, giving them this sort of like gradient shadow that gives Luffy and Bellamy this almost intense, menacing look due to the moon's light. It's especially effective when you see Bellamy charging up his ultimate attack while continuously, shit-talking as it zooms in closer on Luffy's face as he's getting more and more angry. The shadows on Luffy's face help to create an even like greater intensity, I feel like. And yeah, it's interesting how Toei actually does like really a good job in both the bar scene and this scene. I think because they knew how important these scenes were. However, we have to take the good with the bad, unfortunately, and something that I don't like that Toei added in this fight is how they add stuff to make Luffy seem less in control. As I mentioned in the differences section earlier, by having him sort of be off balance and even taking a hit from Bellamy is kind of counterproductive, because in the manga, Luffy is portrayed as having this sort of stoic, emotionless face the entire time, in complete control of the fight, never once getting hit, which further emphasizing just how outclassed Bellamy is compared to Luffy, and I don't like that they kind of undermine this sort of tone that Oda had for this fight. But then after Bellamy is charging up his final attack, Luffy lifts his fist up and calmly asks, "Do I know how to throw a punch, you ask?" Then proceeds to land easily one of the most satisfying punches in the series thus far. This punch is one of the best in the history of One Piece, in my opinion, only beat by one other punch later on in the series. And for those of you who know, you know which one I'm talking about. In the manga, it's a massive, beautifully drawn 2-page spread with this insane amount of intensity in the way the lines are drawn, and you feel it come off the page, and the anime almost captures this perfectly. However, there is one aspect of the anime punch I don't like, is the impact of Bellamy on the wooden floorboards. It kind of falls flat. Like, the punch itself is amazing with the sound design, the impact animation, and the speed it conveys, but I expected Bellamy to sort of hit the floor almost just as hard, but instead they opted to just make this sort of like thud noise, and there's almost no explosiveness in the animation either, when you clearly see the floorboards just splintering up like crazy. But aside from that, the punch on Bellamy is just so awesome. Like, I can't tell you how awesome it was to see that scene, just seeing him, bam, and just punching him into the ground in one hit. And it's such an emphatic punch too, like just Luffy unleashing all his rage on that one punch, and seeing everyone stunned and Bellamy unconscious with Luffy's fist indentation literally in Bellamy's cheek is just so satisfying. But it's here we get a small cutback to the others fixing up the ship. And I really like the conversation / argument between Nami and Zoro, where she questions Zoro on why he also didn't want to go back and fight Bellamy. And Zoro responds to this by saying, fights that leave nothing but sympathy are rough, and simply saying that any fight that's fought with only the sole intention of perpetuating bitterness and resentment is meaningless, and it can actually be kind of harmful. And since they weren't really standing in their way, there was literally no point in fighting them other than to cause more pain and pity. Luffy alone was enough to get the job done of avenging and getting Cricket's gold back. So similarly, when Circus challenges Luffy, he doesn't take them up on it, as again, the fight's already won. He did what he came to do, and any more fighting is senseless. And on a more symbolic level, I love that when Circus exclaims that they won't be beat by dream-chasing idiots, Luffy doesn't make him fall over through violence, but his bold proclamation of going to the sky, that's kind of bringing it full circle, as dreams basically just beat out these materialistic pirates. Now, here is where we get to some really incredible world-expanding introductions as well as world building. I'm not gonna lie, this entire section is just super fun and exciting and really interesting. We get taken to a place called the Holy Land of Marijoa and the introduction of the world government, supreme authority, the 5 Elder Stars, or the Gorosei, which is how I'll be referring to them for the rest of this series. And yeah, Gorosei is just means 5 Elder Stars. That's literally how it's translated. This is our first introduction to the greatest power in the world government, the thing that controls everything, including the Marines and the Shichibukai. It's composed of these 5 larger, older men, one of whom who looks a lot like past Russian President Gorbachev, right down to the prominent bruising mark on his face. And I don't remember offhand, but I'm pretty sure all 5 are actually referencing some other past figure, but I don't remember and I forgot to look it up, so sorry. These guys are definitely ominous. They already give off the vibe of being these incredibly self-righteous and corrupt beings, just based on how they're presented with their black suits and their ostentatiously designed room. To me, it just immediately evokes an image of a corrupt politician. In addition, we see them discuss so calculatedly about controlling the world's events, as they're just concerned about everything. And one of the first things they talk about is the fact that Shanks and Whitebeard, 2 of the most powerful pirates in the world, are beginning to make contact with each other, and it's something that they're concerned about, but the matter at hand that's more important is maintaining the Shichibukai and replacing Crocodile. And they refer to the balance of the 3 great powers, which is important to prevent the world from falling into chaos. And here we are introduced to the balance of power in One Piece, referred to as the 3 great powers, of which the Shichibukai is one leg of, and the other 2 aren't specifically named, but we can probably surmise that they're the Marines and the pirates. I'll go into this a bit more in the spoiler section. But yeah, due to the fall of Crocodile at the hands of Luffy, he's now on the Gorosei's radar, which is crazy that these, like, the ultimate bad guys, I guess you can say, are now focused in on Luffy a bit because of him beating one of the Shichibukai. And in addition, because of Crocodile's defeat, the Gorosei have now called a meeting with the remaining Shichibukai, which is incredibly exciting to finally see some of the other ones. And the first is Don Quixote do Flamingo, who is this crazy flamboyant looking and sadistic acting man. As colorful looking as he is, there's this sort of cruel and calculating presence about him as we see him use his powers to torture a couple of Marine officers, which looks like he has telekinetic powers. And you think maybe this time Oda is actually going to give us a psychic devil fruit, but we also have to be skeptical, as he's now done this with Buggy and Robin now, and most likely Doflamingo is probably the same. And not to toot my own horn, but when I first read this scene, I immediately guessed what Doflamingo's powers are and how it worked, and even what it's called. And so I just always like to pat my shoulder when I get to this point, because I literally guessed it like right away. And I'm sure a lot of people did too. I mean, I'm not special in any way, but I always feel a little bit proud of this one. The other new Shichibukai we're introduced to is Bartholomew Kuma. Now this is a hulking guy, but seems very different from Doflamingo because he's very much more subdued and quiet. He doesn't say much, and he carries around this huge Bible that he reads from, but we don't really get much on him as he just sort of sits down in the back. But he does seem very dangerous in a different way from Doflamingo, in that he just seems like this unstoppable moving, like, huge guy. And something that you notice about both of them immediately is just how freaking huge they are. I mean, mean, they tower over the other normal humans, especially Kuma, who is just this mountain of a man. And not only that, their former bounties are ridiculous, like beyond ridiculous compared to anything we've seen thus far. I mean, Luffy's 100 million bounty is the largest bounty we've seen, but then all of a sudden we're introduced to two guys that are worth almost 3 times that, with Doflamingo being 340 million and Kuma being 290 million. It really kind of puts Crocodile into perspective in the level of threat these two pose for the Straw Hats down the line. Now, one thing, though, that I want to emphasize is that bounties aren't always the be-all, end-all to determining one's physical strength, as bounties often signify not just physical threat, but overall threat to the world government. So there are many, scenarios where a pirate or a criminal may not be the strongest physically, but be given a high bounty because they have the potential to be a real problem for the world government in other ways. And a good example of this is Robin herself. Even at the age of 8 years old, she was given a bounty of 79 million because she had access to information that the world government found problematic. And so they saw her as a much bigger threat because of her knowledge and her intelligence rather than her physical prowess, even though Robin is pretty powerful in her own right, given her devil fruit ability. But I mean, clearly only being 1 million berries less than Crocodile, she still was no match in terms of strength to Crocodile or even Luffy, who's only about 21 million above her. So it's not exactly the same, but the fact that she has such a high bounty makes you think that, yeah, she's got this high value because of something else. And the other thing to consider about the bounties too, especially when it comes to the Shichibukai specifically, is that their bounties are their former bounties at the time when they were inducted into the Shichibukai. So from that point on, their bounties are frozen and no longer updated. It could be that Crocodile proved himself to join the Shichibukai well before his bounty truly ballooned and reflected his actual power and threat. And it would have grown over time had he still been a normal pirate, but that's something we may never actually find out. Now, on the Marine side of things, we get introduced to some big players as well, and we get the introduction of a few high-ranking Marines such as Vice Admiral Tsuru and Fleet Admiral Sengoku with his little cute goat. And here we get to see the top of the Marines, the man in charge of the entire Marine force. There's one important thing I want to point out about Sengoku's nickname, though. So, in the translation, it calls him the Saint Sengoku, but the word Hotoke in his Japanese nickname, Hotoke no Sengoku, is actually Buddha. So really, he's the Buddha Sengoku. But I won't spoil it, but this distinction is actually kind of important much later on. So I wanted to point that out here. Sengoku is interesting, and actually also Tsuru. Like, these two are very high-ranking admirals, and yet they don't seem all that intimidating. They don't look as intimidating, not like Smoker or per se. And so it's interesting to see that the two of the top people are these like very unintimidating looking people. Like Tsuru is just this like frail looking old woman, and Sengoku kind of looks like a really like normal guy. I mean, he is big and built, but he's just not nearly as like intimidating looking as you'd expect someone called the Fleet Admiral and who sits at the top of the food chain in terms of the rank in the Marines. But yeah, it's really interesting to sort of now get sort of a face to all these like unknown threats that we've kind of heard about in the background, whether it be the world government, the head of the Marines, as well as more of the Shichibukai. And we also get one more surprise as Mihawk shows up to the meeting as well, although we don't really learn anything new about him, and we don't even get his bounty, unlike Doflamingo and Kuma. But yeah, it's interesting that he showed up, but it's also kind of unfortunate that we don't get to see the other Shichibukai. We don't get to see Jinbei or the remaining two unnamed Shichibukai here, so there are some surprises still left in the story, but it is pretty insane right off the bat that we get introduced to two of these like insanely strong characters. And one fun fact I wanted to point out, now that we know 5 out of the 7 Shichibukai's names, we can kind of see a pattern developing with their names actually, and they're all based on animals. So starting with Jinbei, which is just the Japanese word for whale shark, or more precisely the first part of Jinbei. So it's Jinbei Zame, and Zame or Same is shark. And so, when you put it all together, Jinbei Zame is whale shark. And then we obviously have Mihawk, who's obviously a hawk. And then similarly, Crocodile is crocodile. And then we get Doflamingo is a flamingo. And then finally, we get Kuma, which is Japanese for bear. And so they're all based on these animals, whether it be whale shark, hawk, crocodile, flamingo, and bear. And I think it's safe to think that the remaining 2 will also be named after some sort of an animal, keeping to this theming. And if all those revelations aren't enough, we get some mysterious man called Luffy, who somehow snuck his way into Marijoa to recommend some mysterious person as the next replacement for Crocodile and in the Shibukai. Leaving that story thread aside for a moment, we then cut to the reveal of the famous Whitebeard, aka Edward Newgate. And one thing people might find a bit weird is he's called Whitebeard, but he's got a prominent white mustache with no beard in sight. So, I mean, he's that much of a badass that people just call him Whitebeard despite having no beard. But actually, in all seriousness, this comes down to something that's kind of lost in translation. As in Japanese, the word hige, which is used in the shirohige name, is used for basically any type of facial hair almost, like beards and mustaches. And also on a completely irrelevant note, hige is also used for cat whiskers. And the way you denote whether it's a mustache or a beard is you add a prefix to it, denoting where it is on the face. So a mustache would be a kuchihige or mouth hige. And then for a beard, you have the ago hige or chin hige. So kuchi is mouth and ago is chin. So based on where it's placed, that's how you determine how you use hige and how it's interpreted. So that's why both shirohige and kurohige work, but we in English call them both beards with white beard and black beard. So in reality, he probably should have been named like White Stash or something like that. But yeah, I mean, let's face it, it doesn't sound as cool. Like White Beard sounds way better and evokes that sort of like pirate theme, because Blackbeard was an actual pirate in real life. Not the Blackbeard we see here, but there was a pirate named Blackbeard, so it would be natural to have somebody named Whitebeard. Putting that aside, though, Whitebeard is one intimidating looking guy, though. The guy is huge. Like, we thought the Shibukai were huge. I mean, Doflamingo and Kuma are big, but man, Whitebeard looks like he's freaking twice their size. I mean, he looks massive. Like, you look at those, like, nurses sitting next to him, like, taking care of him, and he's, like, 5 times bigger than them, sitting down. It's just crazy how big this guy is. It's like, no wonder people are afraid of him and how much power he must have. Although, it is interesting though that he's like hooked up to all these like IVs and like medical things, so he's definitely getting up there in age, but people still clearly fear him and he must have that power in him still. But yeah, it's interesting that he's basically from the last generation and he's getting older, but it's still enough for Shanks to respect this guy. Because, I mean, Shanks is probably like half his age, and he's still like somewhat, on equal footing in terms of power at least. And we do see that Shanks sent one of his crew members to Whitebeard to send him a message to try and prevent Ace from going after White or Blackbeard any further. But yeah, obviously Whitebeard getting offended by this, the fact that he doesn't come himself to deliver the message. And he just kind of like scoffs at it and tells the messenger to tell Shanks that he needs to come himself. But yeah, we see it's interesting that Shanks at all costs wants to stop Ace from going after Blackbeard, to the point where even after the message fails, he's now getting ready to go meet Whitebeard face to face to discuss the danger of Ace chasing Blackbeard, which is kind of crazy because this is someone that even Shanks thinks is a person, of Ace's strength wouldn't stand a chance against. And yeah, I mean, Blackbeard is big, but it's interesting to see how Oda is developing this sort of like the development of Blackbeard's character in terms of just how strong he is, because he doesn't seem strong, at least not compared to what we've seen Ace do. So yeah, this entire section is very interesting to see. And then to bring this entire story back full circle, it turns out that Blackbeard is the crux of all this, as Lafitte is recommending his captain. And then we get this awesome and epic reveal that his captain was in fact that cherry pie man that Luffy was having that sort of dick measuring contest with, and the one that gave the dream speech earlier, who, someone who we thought may be like either at least a neutral person or even a friendly, is in fact Marshall D. Teach, aka Blackbeard, and he is now solidified as a villain. And just as Luffy and Zoro had deduced, the wrestler, that sniper, and that sickly doctor were all part of his crew. And not only that, but the craziest reveal of all is that Blackbeard is a D, just like Luffy. And yeah, obviously I kept mentioning the fact that, yeah, there is some sort of a connection between these two, but the fact that they're both Ds is pretty incredible. And yeah, it's just the fact that, yeah, we knew some kind of connection, but the fact that they're both Ds is just an insane reveal, and you don't really know what to make of it yet. Or at least I didn't at this point in the series. But yeah, whew. The level of new information, world-shattering reveals was pretty incredible in just this one episode, and I'm pretty sure Oda timed the drop of all this to keep us interested in the greater world because Skypiea, which is coming up, for the most part is a very insular story, as they spend their whole arc up in the sky in the island, isolated from the rest of the world. So I'm pretty sure Oda just wanted to drop all this information first so that we would still hold some interest in what's happening down on Earth. But the thing I love about all this is that it gives you a sense of the world and how big it is, and it makes it even seem bigger and really lived in because there's all this crazy stuff happening independent of our main characters. And it's even arguable that what's happening outside the main story could be just as, if not more, interesting, with all these like politics and different powerful players trying to vie for power. And the way they talk, it's as if they control everything in the world. You really get a sense that these guys are a big deal right from the get-go, between the Gorosei, Sengoku, as well as the Shichibukai and Blackbeard. Like, everybody's just kind of like struggling to maintain power. And it's just very interesting to see. And yeah, you really don't know what's going to happen in it. And I love that sort of like that secondary level of like story and world building that's happening outside of Luffy and our main characters. And I think this is where One Piece really shines, like how interesting it gets. It's like, not only do we love following our main characters, but gosh, you see all this and you're just like, what is going to happen? Like, how does this fit in with the rest of the story? And you almost just want to follow the other people. Like, you could create a whole story around like the Shichibukai or Whitebeard or Shanks, and it would be just as interesting. And it's pretty crazy how Oda keeps intertwining and just sort of piling on all these different story elements, and it's just, yeah, it's so crazy. And you just want to keep reading and reading, or watching and seeing like, what does this mean? What does this do? Anyways, getting back to the main story, after that intense and a crazy side tangent, Luffy manages to make it back in time. Well, kind of. He's 45 minutes late, and it turns out he was late because he was hunting for beetles again in the forest, and he comes back with this Hercules beetle, and he's just super jazzed about it, which is really funny. And this is something I actually forgot to mention in the last episode, and I'm sure a lot of people in the West, or at least in America, are like, why is he so obsessed about beetles? And so in Japan, beetles are actually very popular, as they're seen as really cool looking and kind of like the king of bugs. And many kids like to go searching for them as sort of like a pastime. And in fact, in Japanese pop culture, the beetle pops up in media a lot, whether it be in shows or anime or movies. And you have things like Beetleborgs and like Kamen Rider, who are all essentially like superheroes themed after beetles, as well as other anime characters who reference their desire to collect beetles and stuff like that. And yeah, it's just kind of like stems from like this sort of bug catching sort of activity that a lot of kids do in Japan. And interestingly enough, that activity is what led to the creation of Pokemon. But that's a completely different story. But if you want to look that up, it's a pretty interesting story. But anyways, so this obsession with beetles that Luffy has is just kind of like another way to highlight sort of that like childlike nature that Luffy has at heart, and it's really fun to see. And yeah, once Luffy arrives, we get our first glimpse of the newly renovated and revamped Going Merry flying model, and I must say, she looks amazingly beautiful. I love the wings and the sort of the chicken design. It looks pretty cool. Apparently, Luffy thinks this as well, as for thank you, he actually offers up his prized Hercules beetle to Mashita and Shoujo as gratitude for fixing them up. And it's just really funny how this beetle theme just keeps coming back. And kind of like a side tangent, I love Zoro's comment here about how even a pigeon would have been a better choice for a bird to represent flight rather than a chicken, because chickens are notorious for not being able to fly. And he's absolutely right. But a pigeon model wouldn't have looked half as good, in my opinion, as the white of the goat, the goat figurehead of the Going Merry would just not look as good with a pigeon theming. And as they prepare to set sail, I really love the relationship that's built between Cricket and the Straw Hats. There's just something really warm about it, the trust that was built between them. And here we see the overarching theme of inherited will, as they now have inherited the will of Cricket to continue his dream and search for the truth about the gold and the legend of Nolan. And so, yeah, it's still very in keeping of this sort of theme of inherited will, and I really like that Cricket now trusts them enough to sort of go ahead and sort of take on his dream. And with that, they immediately set out to sea with the help of the South Bird. And I really enjoyed the scene with Luffy and Usopp kind of messing around with the South Bird. It's pretty entertaining. But yeah, it's mostly due to the fact that the South Bird has a pretty clearly defined personality too. It's depicted as this sort of proud and cocky bird, which is amazing that Oda managed that with just being able to convey a few lines of dialogue via Chopper's translations and sort of the body language. But yeah, it's funny to see Luffy like flipping his head around and then it just pops right back to the south direction. And then returning to Blackbeard, after having seen that Luffy is actually worth 100 million berries, he decides to go after him for that bounty. And putting the dots together with what Lafitte was referring to in trying to get Blackbeard to take Crocodile's spot among the Shibukai, you can clearly see that their plan is to capture a high bounty, turn it into the Marines, and trade that for a spot in the Shibukai. And now, clearly, Luffy is the target of that plan, as he is a big shot who is worth over 100 million berries. However, before Blackbeard can actually reach the Straw Hats, the knock-up stream all of a sudden blasts them in this unimaginable size explosion of water out of the sea, with Blackbeard's ship kind of pulverized into pieces on the edge of it. However, we do find out that they survived this and maintain that Blackbeard kind of has this sort of, happy-go-lucky attitude similar to Luffy about it. He just kind of like shrugs it off. It's like, oh, well, they'll be back. We'll get them later, instead of being like upset. And, it's funny that they have, again, you see this sort of similarity with Luffy and Blackbeard, but also kind of not. He's almost like this like dark inverse of Luffy. Or a dark mirror of Luffy, I should say, in that they're very similar but opposites at the same time. But yeah, at this point, the Straw Hats and the Merry are now quickly riding up the knock-up stream, but they're not out of the woods yet, as Sanji points out that eventually gravity will get the better of them and eventually hurtle them back down to Earth. However, in a moment very reminiscent of when they went up the reverse mountain, they figure out a way with Nami awesomely declaring her skills as their navigator and takes control of the situation. She has them unfurl the sails and ride the air current the rest of the way. And I love seeing Nami's determined confidence here. Like, I'm totally with Sanji here, and you just fall in love with Nami again, or all over again. And this moment is so awesome and so fun. It just fills you with like energy, seeing them confidently overcoming this like insane situation with a sense of like adventure and excitement as you see them all working together. And then We Are comes blasting on in the background, and it just gives you this extra feeling of adventure as you watch the Merry actually soar through the sky, playing over the main theme of One Piece yet again, using the We Are theme song to great effect. And this image of the Merry flying through the air is a moment in the series you won't really forget. And while not as flashy as many of the more memorable scenes, I mean, to me, I'll always remember this moment as seeing something unbelievable but believably happening. The way they explain everything and the way it's all built up makes sense in this scene, and it makes this scene so amazing and satisfying to watch because it's not just some plot armor BS that allows them to fly. I mean, there is a lot of thought that went into it, and there's a lot of like suspension of disbelief, don't get me wrong, but you don't really think about it because Oda builds up to it and explains everything so well that when you're seeing this for the first time, all you're thinking about is how magical and how special what you're seeing is before your eyes. And yeah, I absolutely love this moment of seeing the Going Merry just kind of soar up the sky. But yeah, that's where this episode ends. And with these 3 episodes, I mean, these are some of the greater episodes of the entire series. They're just so damn fun to watch with some incredibly earth-shattering like revelations, and it's just a sort of explosive expansion of the world of One Piece, getting a glimpse at the top powers of the world with the world government, the head of the Marines, and even some of the stronger Shibukai with Doflamingo and Kuma's introduction, as well as a formal introduction to Blackbeard and his crew. And so we got like huge players like being introduced here, and not to mention just the satisfying defeat of Bellamy, as well as the Going Merry soaring up to the sky. And yeah, these 3 episodes, there's just so much to love about them, and I really enjoyed watching all 3 of these episodes. And yeah, so next episode we are going to start the Skypiea arc, and this brings the Jaya arc to a close. But yeah, it'll be exciting to see Although next episode, I won't be quite starting the Skypiea arc yet. We'll actually be going into another cover story, and so keep an eye out for that. And then after that, we'll get into the start of the Skypiea arc. But yeah, if you enjoyed this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Also, you can check out my Instagram and Twitter account at SunnyGo Podcast if you want updates of when I post new episodes or see pictures of my manga collection. But yeah, stay tuned for actually a pretty in-depth, not an in-depth, but a pretty extensive spoiler section. But yeah, if you want to stay away from spoilers, you can check me out on the next episode. But yeah, I always wanted to say thank you for taking the time to listen, and I hope to see you on the next podcast. See ya. Alrighty, so spoiler sections. Since this episode is already running pretty long, I'm going to run through these pretty quickly and unscripted. But yeah, it's interesting to see Bellamy's defeat here and then, seeing his return later in Dressrosa, especially since we haven't seen the scene with his connection to Doflamingo later on. But, looking back on this moment where Luffy just beats down Bellamy and then he sort of gets his redemption arc, it's a very interesting moment to see again. But obviously we'll discuss more about that once we see the discussion or the connection with Doflamingo, as well as when we get to Dressrosa. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is the three great powers. It's funny. I never realized this because I don't know. At some point, it was just sort of ingrained in me that the three powers are the Shichibukai, the Marine Admirals, and the Yonko. And I don't really remember at what point this became the fact, because when they mention the three great powers here, they don't actually mention the Admirals themselves. They don't mention the Yonko, but you just kind of assume that it's the Marines and the pirates on the other end. But I found it interesting when I rewatched this. I was like, they don't actually mention the Yonko or the Admirals. And then similarly, the other point that I made in the non-spoiler section about the Hotoke no Sengoku nickname, it foreshadows his devil fruit long before we ever get to see it, because he has the Hito no Mi, or person or human fruit, modeled Daibutsu, or like the Buddha statue. And so we do see his power and his ability to change into this massive golden Buddha. And so I don't really know why they decided to change this, other than maybe to avoid religious references, but his power is just inherently religious to Buddhism. So I don't understand how they could even avoid that. So I don't know why they changed it to saint, but it just seems odd that they didn't keep it, the Buddha. And it's kind of weird that they translated it as Saint Sengoku. And then we get the reveal of the Shichibukai. And it's this scene always still kind of gives me chills, seeing Doflamingo and Kuma show up for the first time. Like, these guys are larger than life, not just like literally larger than life, because they are bigger, but just the fact that you see them and they seem like such a far off like threat, with just the bounties that are revealed. 340 mil and 290 mil are just like absurd at this point in the series. And when you see that for the first time, it's just like, whoa, these guys are crazy strong. And sure enough, when you see them, like, for much, much further down the line, Kuma defeating them in Thriller Bark, as well as, when they get completely manhandled by him in Sabodi. Like, it's just pretty incredible how strong Kuma is. And then once you get further down in the story, when you see Dressrosa and just see how powerful Doflamingo is, like, talk about like a long game with those two, especially Doflamingo. Like, you don't even get to see him till after the time skip. And when Luffy faces him, he needs Gear Fourth to beat him. And so it's like at this point in the series, it really does seem like Luffy just is small fry compared to those two. And even afterwards, it just seems like they still would have a tough time beating him. And it turns out to be true. I mean, luckily, Kuma turns out to not be a real enemy, at least when he still has consciousness, until, Vegapunk gets a hold of him again and the Marines kind of like turn him into this mindless robot. But when he is kind of an obstacle to them, he's just so much more powerful than any of the Straw Hats. And then, of course, we don't get to see Jinbei, and we don't get any mention of Moria or Boa. They are left for a much later surprise with Thriller Bark, where Gekko Moria gets introduced, as well as, Boa Hancock getting introduced in Amazon Lily much later on in the story. And it's funny because we know 5 of them so early on. Of course, we don't see Jinbei, but we don't even get a mention of them for so long. It just seems like forever between Doflamingo and Kuma's reveal, all the way to Thriller Bark, where Moria is revealed, and then even further down the line, we finally get to see the seventh and final member in Boa Hancock in Amazon Lily, close to the end of the first half of the series. And sure enough, they are both named after animals, with obviously boa constrictor and, gecko, as in gecko. And also, Moria has two, actually. So in Japanese, bat is called komori. So when you say gecko moria and you just take the middle part of it, komori, and you get bat. And so he's actually got two of them, interestingly enough. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is just the poor design of Marco in this episode. Like, it's funny looking at Marco in this episode. And I forgot to mention this in the non-spoiler section, but it's just funny to see how different Marco looks here compared to what he looks like now. And it's almost like a gradual evolution too, because he starts off looking like this really plain looking guy, and then he doesn't even have the right color clothing or the right color hair. And he gets a bit more detail as we go on, and then finally when we get to Marineford and actually see him in action, that's when we get the final design of Marco, and he's like this cool ass character. But it's really funny to see, even in the manga, he doesn't look all that impressive, and it almost seemed like Oda later on made that character Marco as we know him today. And yeah, talk about glow up. You look at Marco right now in the Wano arc, and you look at Marco in this episode, it's so different. It's so sad how poor he's drawn in this episode. And then finally, I wanted to kind of talk about Blackbeard ultimately going after Ace. Because of the fact that he missed out on catching Luffy, he manages to somehow actually run into Ace, and Ace catches up to him. And obviously, we know from the story that Blackbeard doesn't get Luffy to become a Shichibukai. He, in fact, captures Ace and turns him into the Marines to become a Shichibukai. And then, obviously, that leads to the whole Impel Downs and the Marineford pirate war that takes place towards the end of the first half of the series. And so yeah, there's a lot of things just flying in the air in the story at this point, and I don't know how Oda actually keeps all this straight. He must have a crazy mind, or he has a really, really well organized diagram or something, because I just can't imagine how he keeps track of all this. But yeah, he's an amazing man. It's just crazy. He's a genius. But anyways, that's pretty much it. I know this episode is super long, but thank you for listening if you have listened all this time. But yeah, I'll see you on the next episode. Bye.